mistake. Even when he's not perfect, you should respect him. You should show him that respect. Well, there's ways to do that. But anyway, other things that are not easy for women. So it's easier for women to gossip. It's easier for a group of women to come together and talk about things. And most of the time, not all of the time, I trust that here, the women from here, that you guys are all really good about sharing just good news about other people. But I know that it doesn't always happen. Women struggle with gossip, and most of the time it's negative gossip. So as wives, Satan may really tempt you to go to other women and share everything to them that your husband does wrong. My husband, he's not a good enough leader. My husband is never home on time. My husband says one thing and never does it. I've asked my husband to clean the garage for the last 3 weeks, and he always says yes, but he never does. And those things we kind of, or women, sometimes tend to spread a little bit easier. It's easier for you to maybe tell other women in your life or tell your friends what your husband does that is not right as to oppose to what is right. Wives, I want you to think about the last time you went to your friend and said, my husband, he is the best at this. When's the last time you called a friend of yours, a girlfriend, and said, my husband, I am so proud of him, the way that he does this. Man, I love the way that my husband leads, or I love the way that he plays with the children or takes time for the children, or I love that he goes to work with excitement and he comes home and he doesn't want to just dump the whole bad day on me, but he leaves it at the door. And he puts a smile on even though he may have a difficult day. When's the last time you had that conversation with your friends? I want you to think about that. Or are most of your conversations about how your husband came home and he was just miserable? He must have had a bad day at work, but he doesn't want to talk about it. Or he's always leaving stuff laying around and it just bugs you. What do you share about your husband to other women? How do you build him up the way that God said you are to be his support system? Or do you? Another thing that's somewhat unnatural for women is allowing your husbands to lead you. Allowing him to lead. Some husbands want to lead, but they can't lead their families, but they can't because the women won't let them. It happens. It's not always the case, but it happens. And then the other one of that is following your husband, even if you disagree with him. This goes back to respect. Your husband may want to go somewhere, or he may want to do something, he may want to invest money into something, and you might not agree with it. And for whatever reason, it happens anyway. And instead of helping him or supporting him in that, you'll constantly just run it down instead of following him, even though you disagreed with that. You might even be hoping that he fails so that at the end you could say, I told you so. These are things that are hard for women because the culture and society teaches just the opposite, that you don't need to do those things. But God says, no, this is who you're supposed to be as a wife to your husband. Now that can look a whole lot of different ways depending on your situations. And the last thing that's not easy for most women is changing the car oil. How many frias, when's the last time you changed oil in a car or pickup? Did anyone? Oh, okay, so we have 2. Okay, well, good for you. But this is probably not something that most women naturally do. Because again, God created us differently. Why is it that most of the time this is what the man does? And men, I could ask you, when's the last time you changed a diaper willingly? And the women would say, well, we don't do it willingly either. We just know it has to be done, which, yes, thank you. And we'd probably only have a 2, 3, 4 hands up either. These are things that are just not natural for women. And Satan wants to attack you by saying you don't need to do them because your husband doesn't deserve it. Well, let's go to Ephesians again. So we were there anyway, but let's go to verses 21 through 24. So Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21 through 24. And so I would encourage you to read along as we read this and study it as well. But submit to one another and it's up here as well. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Okay, and that's important. We'll get into the why. But wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. In everything. Now, this is assuming that your husband is a godly leader. That your husband is the godly man, as Christ is the head of the church, that he is also the head of your family in that way. But as wives, there does come a time when you need to, say your husband says, well, don't talk to my kids about Christ. Don't teach them about that. There may come a time when you say, well, I need to step out and I need to teach our children about God and about Christ. There may come that time. But other than that, respecting your husband and submitting yourself to him is to be done, what does he say? In everything. Verse 24. These are not my words. This is what God says. In everything. Submit yourselves to him. See, there takes a real humbleness of mentality to say, you know what, I am going to submit myself to you. And the word submissive, and so here I've defined it as best as, or most accurately as I think I can, but to be submissive is to obey or yield to someone else. When you are submissive, you submit to someone else's will, which literally means you put your own desires lower than theirs. Okay, now you might be saying, okay, well, why are just the women supposed to do this? He never says just the women are to, but he emphasizes that women should. Verse 21 becomes important here. Let's read it again. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. He doesn't just tell the wives to submit to the husbands. First, he tells them both to submit to each other because of Christ. So if you are a godly husband and a godly wife, then you should be both, let's not use the word submit here because it has this negative connotation to it, but you should both be putting each other's wills before your own. That's submissiveness. Now you're submitting. But I think he specifically adds in verses 22 through 24 because he knows that there's this attack on women, that this is somehow to belittle them. That now all of a sudden you're worth less because you're underneath your man. And that's not what he's saying. But he says, submit yourselves to him. Now, if this is done from both sides, if husbands are putting your wife's will above your own, and wives, if you're doing the same for your husbands, you're going to have a very prosperous marriage. You are going to have a very prosperous marriage if that can be done. But that takes humility from both sides. But specifically, I think women, because of the man's ego, this is difficult. We might be tough and macho and have all kinds of muscles and stuff, but our pride is very easily damaged. And when wives want to tell us how to do things, it sometimes really hurts our ego, our self-esteem. And your husbands will begin to feel totally worthless if you attempt to control them. But they will feel absolutely loved and respected by you if you submit yourselves to them. They will still love you. They will not control you. They will not take advantage of you if they're godly anyway, they will not do those things. So there's nothing to be afraid of in submitting to your husband's wives if he is the godly husband that he should be. And even if he's not, that is his sin between him and God. But don't make disrespecting him your sin between you and God. Those are separate issues. So, let's go to the second one. So we have submission and then we have respect. Wives, respect your husbands. And we talked about this already, Ephesians 5:33. This is a command. This is not a choice. He doesn't say if you want to, respect your husbands. If your husbands are good enough, respect them. No, he says, and we'll read it again, however, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Do you do this? Do you do this? Many wives, and I'll just read it up here, but many wives complain about their husband's lack of love, yet they refuse to show them respect. How do you expect your husbands to love you if you don't respect them? If your husband knows that you respect him, I can assure you that he will love you. And it may not happen right away, but with time, he will find out how to show you that love too. But many wives, too many wives, want their husbands to show them love first, and then they want to respect them. It's a conditional respect. Basically saying, I will respect you if you do this. How many of you would have a job if you would go up to your boss and say, hey, I know you're my boss, but I don't respect anything you say. Unless first you give me a raise, then I'll respect you, and then I'll listen to you again. But I think each and every one of us who has a job and wants to keep that job shows our boss respect. Now, your husband is not your boss. But when a boss feels like, as an employee, this employee respects me, he listens to me, he supports me, he does what I ask him to do, that employee is worth something to me. And wives, as a husband, and I can speak from experience to this, when my wife respects me, and I know that she's going to listen to me, and I know that she's not going to say, well, only if you do this, then I will respect you, then it becomes really easy for me to love her. It becomes easy. So, wives, be careful that you don't expect an unconditional love from your husband, but yet only want to give him a conditional respect. If you want your husband to love you even though you're not perfect, then you better respect him even though he's not perfect. Let's not expect something from him that we're not willing to give to him. And husbands, this goes the same way. If you want your wives to respect you, then love them unconditionally. And they will unconditionally respect you. But can you see how easily Satan can ruin a family? He doesn't even have to attack both the husband and the wife. But if he just gets one of these two pillars, they're automatically going to kind of turn against each other. And the children come underneath that. This is why this is important. And this is why Satan spends so much of his time, not just Satan, but the world and everything is designed to destroy those two pillars. Because that'll make your whole house crumble. But more specifically, looking at the wife today. A man's ego can be very sensitive. You want a man who feels confident in himself. Most women do. You want a man who can stand somewhere and say, this is what we're going to do. I know this is the right thing to go, or the right thing to do, and we're going that way. Like directions, most of us, men are typically better because we drive a lot of places and we know which way north, south, east, west is. And so when we know north is that way, we're going to go north. I hope it's that way. but we're going to go that way. And you want, like, we know it's that way, so I'm going there. Women, wives, I trust that you want a man who knows where he's going in life and goes there. I don't think you want a man who doesn't know where he's going and he's always looking for which way to go or what to do or how to get there. You want a man who's confident. So don't ruin his confidence. Women so often complain about the man not being confident in things, yet you're the reason he's not confident. You're the reason. You beat him down in every way you can. Every time he makes a mistake, you harp on it. Every time he does something wrong, you remind him of it. You never let it go. And then you wonder why your man isn't confident in anything that he does. Maybe it's because you're not being the supportive wife that God calls you to be. These are hard truths, and I hope they're not the case for you or your marriage. But the chances are this is something you have gone through, or something you will go through. Maybe even something you are going through. But as wives, are you building up your man's self-esteem, or are you tearing it down? Now, you don't want your man to become egotistic, where he's just full of himself, but you do want a man who's confident, who's going to lead you and know which way he's leading you. And I think we already talked about the other ones. So how, wives, what different ways do you keep your husbands from being the men that they can be? How do you keep your husbands from leading? And here's just a few. The first one is pretty clear. You just won't let them. There are some wives who just have to be in charge. It just has to be their way. And you simply don't let your husband lead. And maybe you don't even want him to lead, because you want to be in control. Well, God designed the husbands to lead the homes. And wives, you have a big part in that too. It's not like you're less or that your role isn't as important. It is. But allow your husbands to lead. Don't keep that from them. The second one is, whatever they do, it's not good enough anyway. Here's a big difference between my wife and I. And so we just butchered a calf yesterday. And we know already that I'm not going to put the meat in the bags because it might be 1.15 pounds instead of 1.00 pounds, and that's not good enough. So we already know that. So she's going to put the meat in the bags because she doesn't want me to, and I'm okay with that. But sometimes when your husband wants to lead you and lead your family, you say, well, the way you do it, I don't like it. My way is right. So I'm just going to do it. So your husband is not going to want to lead your family if when he tries, you change everything that he just tried and do it your way. He's not going to want to lead you in any direction if you tell him exactly step for step for step for step how to get there and how you would do it and how the way that they're doing it is wrong and how if you were to do it, you would do it totally differently. Your husband's not going to want to lead you. In fact, over time, he's just going to quit trying. He's just going to stop because nothing you do is going to be good enough anyway. Nothing he does is going to be good enough anyway. And with time, he's just going to quit trying. And then comes, well, then you'll blame him for not trying. But maybe you've squashed his self-esteem to the point where he feels hopeless. These are struggles women face. The next one is when they fail, you blame them. We kind of talked about this a little bit, but your husband may be trying to lead you, and he may make a mistake, and he probably will make mistakes because he's not perfect. The worst thing you can do at that point in time is say, I told you so that wasn't going to work. How did you not see that that wasn't going to work? Can't believe you didn't think about that. You are a team. And when a team makes a decision, then you both made that decision. Your husband is the leader. And when you decide something as a family and it does not work, it is not your responsibility or your job to blame the leader. Blaming the leader will only make him step down and will let somebody else become the leader. It's not your job to blame him every time he makes a mistake. You're in this together. As a husband and a wife, you are together raising a family. You are paying bills together. You are living in the same home together. You are driving cars together. All those things, those decisions you make together. And so when that ends up being a bad decision, together you made a bad decision. Don't blame your husbands because they're not going to want to make decisions anymore. Number 4, you lead instead of waiting for them to have a chance. Some women are good leaders. And there's nothing wrong with that. You need women who are good leaders to lead the ladies' Bible studies, to lead ladies' groups, prayer meetings, those types of things. Small groups, whatever that is. You need women who have leadership capabilities. It's a great gift. But some women don't also have patience. And so when they want to do something, instead of giving their husbands a chance, they just lead. Sometimes as wives, I think you need to wait for your husbands. They might be thinking about what's the best way to do this. And they're thinking about how as a family, what should we be deciding? And so if this happens, then what are we going to do? Or if that happens, then how are we going to react? And instead of waiting for your husband to then process all the information and then lead you, you just lead before he has time to get all that done. And the same thing happens as if you blame him. Eventually, he's going to stop trying to plan things. And maybe he'll feel pressured, so the next time he's supposed to lead your family, he's going to quickly do it before you can, and he's not going to have thought through all the information he needs to. And he'll make a mistake, and then you'll blame him. These things will just tear your husband down. Number 5, constant nagging about what they should do. Maybe you are this, where you're constantly saying, do this already, or change already, or why do you always got to keep doing this? These things don't build up your husband. They will just tear him down. Now, there are proper ways if your husband needs to change things. Again, 1 Peter chapter 3, there are proper ways to help him with that. And I would encourage you to read that. But this constant nagging will only annoy him. It will only annoy him. And he'll get tired of it. And he'll feel like you're just trying to boss him around. And it'll have a negative effect. Now, reminding is different than nagging. Sometimes husbands forget things and need to be reminded. You can do that, but do it in a respectful way.